The autumn evening cast a golden glow across the manicured gardens of the Westbrook estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, where towering maple trees displayed their crimson and amber foliage like nature's own chandelier. The sprawling Georgian mansion, with its limestone facade and copper-roofed turrets, stood as a monument to generational wealth and refined taste. Tonight, the estate would host one of the most exclusive charity galas on the East Coast social calendar, an event that had taken 6 months to plan and would raise millions for the Metropolitan Children's Hospital. Inside the mansion's grand ballroom, a team of event coordinators made final adjustments to the elaborate decorations. Crystal chandeliers imported from Vienna cast prismatic light across marble floors that had been polished to mirror-like perfection. Arrangements of white orchids and pale pink roses, flown in fresh from Ecuador that morning, adorned every surface, while ice sculptures depicting children at play slowly melted in artistic splendor near the bar stations. The ballroom itself was a masterpiece of early 20th century architecture, with coffered ceilings painted in gold leaf and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of Long Island Sound. Original oil paintings by Sargent and Whistler adorned the silk-covered walls, while antique Persian rugs defined intimate seating areas where the evening's most important conversations would unfold. Richard Westbrook III stood in his private study overlooking the estate's preparations, adjusting his platinum cufflinks as he reviewed the evening's guest list one final time. At 52, he commanded the kind of respect and attention that only came with managing a $15 billion investment portfolio and serving on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies. His presence could move markets, his opinions influenced policy, and his approval could make or break careers throughout the financial district. Westbrook's success story was the stuff of American legend, the grandson of a modest Connecticut farmer who had built an empire through brilliant strategic thinking, ruthless negotiation, and an unwavering focus on results that bordered on obsession. Westbrook Capital Management, the firm he had founded 25 years earlier, now employed over 2,000 people across 12 international offices and managed assets for sovereign wealth funds, university endowments, and ultra-high net worth individuals from around the globe. The evening's guest list read like a who's who of American power and influence. Senators and Supreme Court justices would mingle with technology moguls and entertainment industry titans. Foreign ambassadors would discuss trade policy with pharmaceutical executives, while hedge fund managers debated market trends with real estate developers. The charity component, raising funds for children's healthcare, provided the perfect cover for the kind of high-level networking that drove American business and politics. But despite his professional success and social prominence, Westbrook struggled with the most important relationship in his life, the one with his 8-year-old daughter, Isabella. Since his wife Catherine's death from ovarian cancer 3 years earlier, Westbrook had found himself emotionally adrift, uncertain how to navigate the complex world of childhood grief and parental responsibility while maintaining the demanding schedule that his business empire required. Isabella Westbrook was a precocious and sensitive child who had inherited her mother's artistic temperament and her father's intellectual curiosity. She possessed the kind of intuitive emotional intelligence that often develops in children who have experienced profound loss, combined with a natural creativity that expressed itself through drawing, storytelling, and a remarkable ear for music. Since her mother's death, Isabella had struggled with nightmares, separation anxiety, and periods of deep sadness that her father's well-meaning but emotionally distant parenting style couldn't address. It was into this complicated family dynamic that Elena Vasquez had arrived 2 years earlier, hired through an exclusive domestic placement agency that catered to Manhattan's most affluent families. At 31, Elena possessed the perfect combination of professional qualifications and personal warmth that made her an ideal caregiver for children dealing with trauma and loss. Elena's educational background included a bachelor's degree in early childhood development from Queen's College, specialized training in grief counseling for children, and fluency in 3 languages that reflected her multicultural upbringing. But beyond her formal credentials, Elena possessed an intuitive understanding of children's emotional needs and a natural ability to create the kind of safe, nurturing environment that allowed young minds to heal and flourish. The journey that had brought Eleanor to the Westbrook household was marked by sacrifice, determination, and dreams deferred but never abandoned. Born in the Bronx to parents who had immigrated from Puebla, Mexico in the early 1980s, Elena had grown up in a household where education was revered as the key to opportunity, and music was considered essential to the soul's well-being. Her father, Miguel Vasquez, worked as a building superintendent while her mother, Carmen, cleaned offices at night and took in sewing during the day. Despite working multiple jobs and struggling with the language barriers that made every interaction with schools and bureaucracies challenging, Miguel and Carmen had maintained their dignity and optimism through their unwavering commitment to their children's futures and their shared belief that hard work and integrity would eventually be rewarded. Elena's childhood had been shaped by the rhythm of her parents' sacrifices, Miguel leaving before dawn to begin his maintenance rounds, Carmen returning home after midnight with tired eyes, but always finding energy to help with homework or listen to concerns about school and friends. The family's modest 2-bedroom apartment in the Castle Hill neighborhood had been filled with music, laughter, and the constant reminder that education was the pathway to a better life. But it was Elena's voice that had always set her apart, even as a child. By age 6, she was singing solos at their local Catholic church, her pure soprano tone carrying hymns in both Spanish and English with a clarity and emotional depth that moved congregations to tears. Her elementary school music teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had recognized Elena's exceptional gift and had arranged for her to receive voice lessons from a retired opera singer who lived in the neighborhood. Throughout her teenage years, Elena had been the star of every school musical production, winning regional competitions and attracting the attention of talent scouts from prestigious music conservatories. Her voice teachers spoke of her potential for a professional career in opera or musical theater, describing her instrument as a once-in-a-generation voice that combined technical perfection with interpretive depth far beyond her years. The scholarship offers had begun arriving during Elena's junior year of high school, full-ride opportunities to study at Juilliard, the Manhattan School of Music, and the New England Conservatory. For several months, Elena had dreamed of a future filled with opera stages, recording contracts, and concert halls where she would share her gift with audiences around the world. But the practical realities of her family's financial situation had ultimately guided Eleanor's decision in a different direction. Even with full scholarships covering tuition, the living expenses in expensive cities like New York and Boston would have required additional loans that her family couldn't afford. More importantly, Elena's success would have meant that her younger brother Carlos couldn't pursue his own dreams of becoming an engineer, as the family's limited resources could only support one child's higher education at a time. The decision to pursue education and childcare instead of music had been one of the most difficult of Elena's life, requiring her to set aside dreams that had defined her identity since childhood. But she had never regretted the choice, finding deep satisfaction in her work with children and maintaining her musical gifts through private performances for the families she served. Elena's relationship with Isabella Westbrook had developed into something far deeper than the typical caregiver-child bond. From their first meeting, Elena had recognized in Isabella the same kind of sensitive, artistic temperament that she had possessed as a child. The little girl's grief over her mother's death, combined with her natural creativity and emotional intelligence, created complex needs that required patience, understanding, and unconditional love. Elena had approached Isabella's care with the same dedication and creativity that she had once brought to musical performance. She read bedtime stories with different voices for each character, turning the nightly routine into theatrical productions that helped Isabella process emotions and escape into worlds of imagination and wonder. She helped with homework by creating games and songs that made learning mathematics and science engaging and fun. Most importantly, Elena had introduced Isabella to the healing power of music. During their quiet evenings together, Elena would sing Spanish lullabies that her own mother had sung to her, Disney songs that sparked joy and laughter, and occasionally classical pieces that showcased the full range and beauty of her voice. These private concerts had become sacred moments for both of them, times when grief and worry melted away, and the house filled with beauty and connection. Elena, Isabella would often say after these impromptu performances, "You have the most beautiful voice in the whole world. When you sing, it's like my mommy is still here with us." The comment always brought tears to Elena's eyes, as she understood that her music was providing Isabella with something that no amount of money or privilege could buy: comfort, connection, and the sense that beauty and love could still exist even in the midst of loss and sadness. But while Elena's relationship with Isabella flourished, her interactions with Richard Westbrook remained formal and distant. He viewed Elena primarily as a highly qualified service provider whose job was to ensure his daughter's safety and well-being, while he focused on the more important matters of building his financial empire and maintaining his social position among New York's elite. Westbrook's emotional unavailability wasn't born of cruelty or indifference, but rather from his own unprocessed grief and his lifelong conditioning that successful men express their love through provision rather than presence. He had loved Catherine deeply, but their relationship had been built around shared social activities and intellectual discussions rather than emotional intimacy. Her death had left him not only bereft, but also completely unprepared to navigate the complex emotional landscape that parenting required. The irony of Westbrook's attitude toward Elena was that her background and personal story were far more compelling than those of many of his wealthy associates. Elena's parents had overcome obstacles that would have destroyed weaker people, maintaining their dignity and optimism while building a better life for their children through sheer force of will and unshakable moral character. Miguel Vasquez had arrived in New York with nothing but hope and a willingness to work 18-hour days to support his family. He had learned English by watching television and reading newspapers, had studied building maintenance and repair through correspondence courses, and had gradually built a reputation for reliability and craftsmanship that made him invaluable to property management companies throughout the Bronx. Carmen Vasquez had started her American journey cleaning hotel rooms for minimum wage, but her attention to detail and tireless work ethic had eventually led to supervisory positions and ultimately to a small but successful housekeeping service that employed a dozen other immigrant women. She had used her earnings to take night classes in accounting and business management, preparing herself for the day when she could expand her operations and provide even more opportunities for women seeking economic independence. The sacrifice that both parents had made for Elena's education was extraordinary and constant. Miguel had worked double shifts during the winter months, shoveling snow and repairing heating systems in below-freezing temperatures so that Elena could afford the bus fare to voice lessons and competition. Carmen had taken on additional cleaning contracts during the summer, working 16-hour days in unair-conditioned buildings so that Elena could attend music camps and workshops that might advance her career prospects. Most remarkably, both parents had encouraged Elena's musical gifts, even when it became clear that pursuing them might mean financial hardship for the entire family. They understood that their daughter possessed something rare and beautiful, and they were determined to nurture that gift, even if they couldn't ultimately afford to let her pursue it professionally. Elena's decision to enter the field of childcare and education had been motivated not just by practical considerations, but also by a genuine calling to work with children who needed special attention and care. Her first position had been with a family in Westchester whose 6-year-old son was struggling with autism and developmental delays. Elena's patience, creativity, and musical abilities had helped the child make remarkable progress in communication and social interaction. Word of Elena's exceptional skills had spread through the network of affluent families who employed high-end domestic help, and she had quickly developed a reputation as someone who could work miracles with difficult or traumatized children. The Westbrook family had specifically sought her out after Catherine's death, recognizing that Isabella would need specialized care to navigate her grief and continue her emotional development. What none of the families Elena worked for knew was that she continued to pursue her musical education in secret, taking voice lessons on her days off and attending masterclasses at local music schools whenever her schedule permitted. She had maintained relationships with several of her high school music teachers, who continued to coach her without charge because they believed in her extraordinary talent and hoped that circumstances might eventually allow her to pursue professional opportunities. Elena's ultimate goal remained the same as it had been in high school, to somehow find a way to combine her love of music with her dedication to helping children. She had researched music therapy programs and had begun taking online courses in child psychology, working toward the day when she might be able to open her own practice using music to help young people overcome trauma and develop emotional resilience. But for now, her focus remained on Isabella and the complex work of helping an 8-year-old girl navigate the devastating loss of her mother while maintaining her natural creativity and joie de vivre. The relationship had become the most rewarding of Elena's life, providing her with a sense of purpose and connection that made the sacrifice of her musical ambitions feel meaningful rather than tragic. As the afternoon of the charity gala progressed, Elena helped Isabella with her homework while keeping an ear tuned to the preparations happening throughout the mansion. Caterers bustled through the kitchen, preparing canapés and elaborate appetizers, while florists made final adjustments to centerpieces and event staff tested sound systems and lighting equipment. Isabella was supposed to make a brief appearance at the beginning of the evening, greeting guests and thanking them for supporting children's healthcare before retiring to her room for the night. Elena had helped her select an appropriate dress, a navy blue velvet creation with pearl buttons that made her look like a miniature version of the sophisticated women who would attend the gala. "Elena," Isabella said, as she practiced her thank you speech for the 3rd time, "will you stay nearby tonight? I get nervous when Daddy has big parties and all those people are here." Eleanor smiled, understanding the child's anxiety about the formal social interactions that were expected of her. "Of course, Mija. I'll be right here in the house, and if you need anything at all, you just have to ask, and I'll come help you." The reassurance seemed to calm Isabella's nerves, and she returned to her homework with renewed focus. But Elena noticed that the child kept glancing toward the windows, where the sounds of party preparation were growing louder and more complex. As evening approached and the first guests began arriving, Elena helped Isabella get ready for her appearance, carefully arranging her hair and ensuring that her dress was perfectly pressed. The child looked beautiful and mature beyond her years, but Elena could see the nervousness in her dark eyes as the moment of her public appearance drew near. The guest list for the evening was truly impressive, featuring names that appeared regularly on the covers of business magazines and society pages. Senator Patricia Hamilton arrived in a motorcade that suggested her likely presidential ambitions, while technology mogul David Chen emerged from a Tesla that had been driven by one of his company's automated systems. Real estate developer Margaret Thornton swept through the front door in a gown that probably cost more than most people earned in a year, while pharmaceutical executive James Morrison discussed patent legislation with a Supreme Court justice over champagne that cost $1,000 per bottle. But perhaps the most anticipated guest was Victoria Ashford, the legendary opera singer who had dominated the international classical music scene for over 2 decades. Now in her 60s and gradually reducing her performance schedule, Ashford remained one of the most respected and influential figures in the classical music world. Her presence at the gala was considered a major coup for the event organizers, as she rarely attended social functions and commanded appearance fees that most charities couldn't afford. Ashford's attendance had been secured through her personal friendship with Richard Westbrook, who had served on the board of the Metropolitan Opera for several years and had donated millions to support their educational outreach programs. The opera star's appearance was expected to add gravitas and cultural sophistication to an evening that might otherwise be dismissed as just another excuse for wealthy people to network and show off their expensive clothes. As the cocktail hour progressed, Eleanor remained upstairs with Isabella, helping her practice her speech one final time before her appearance in the ballroom. The child had memorized her remarks perfectly, but Eleanor could see that she was still nervous about speaking in front of so many important adults. "Remember, Misha," Elena said as she adjusted Isabella's hair ribbon, "you don't have to be perfect. These people are here because they care about helping sick children, just like you do. You're going to speak from your heart about something that matters to you, and that's the most important thing." Isabella nodded, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. "Will you watch me when I'm speaking? I'll be right there in the hallway where you can see me," Elena promised. "And if you get scared or forget what you want to say, just look at me and remember that you're brave and smart and you have something important to share." When the time came for Isabella's appearance, Eleanor accompanied her to the ballroom and positioned herself near the service entrance where she could observe the proceedings without intruding on the formal program. The ballroom was filled with beautifully dressed guests who had contributed thousands of dollars for the privilege of attending the evening's festivities. Isabella's speech was charming and heartfelt, delivered with the kind of innocent sincerity that only children possess. She spoke about visiting the children's hospital with her father, meeting young patients who were fighting serious illnesses, and understanding that the money raised tonight would help provide them with better treatment and more hope for recovery. "When my mommy was sick," Isabella said, her voice clear and strong despite the emotional content of her words, "the doctors and nurses at the hospital took such good care of her. Even though she couldn't get better, they made sure she wasn't scared and that she could still laugh and sing with me. I want all the kids at the hospital to have that same kind of care, so they can get better and go home to their families." The speech was met with enthusiastic applause and more than a few tears from guests who were moved by the child's eloquence and obvious sincerity. As Isabella made her way back through the crowd, stopping to accept compliments and kind words from the adults, Elena felt a surge of pride in the remarkable little girl who had become such an important part of her life. But as Isabella returned to her side, Eleanor noticed that several guests were looking at her with curiosity and confusion. She was clearly not a guest at the party, given her simple black dress and modest appearance, but her obvious close relationship with Isabella suggested that she was more than just a servant assigned to supervise the child's appearance. It was Margaret Thornton who first voiced the question that several people were thinking. "Isabella, dear," she said in a tone that mixed sweetness with subtle condescension, "who is this lovely young woman who's been taking such good care of you?" Isabella beamed with pride as she introduced Eleanor. "This is Elena. She's my nanny, but she's also my best friend and the most wonderful person in the whole world. She takes care of me and teaches me Spanish and sings the most beautiful songs you've ever heard." The introduction was delivered with the kind of unself-conscious enthusiasm that only children possess, but Eleanor could see that it made some of the adults uncomfortable. The idea that a domestic employee might be considered the most wonderful person in the whole world by the daughter of one of their peers challenged assumptions about social hierarchy and the proper relationships between employers and staff. Eleanor stepped forward with quiet dignity to diffuse the potentially awkward situation. "It's a pleasure to meet you all," she said. "Isabella is a remarkable young lady, and I'm honored to be part of her life. I hope you'll have a wonderful evening supporting such an important cause." The response was gracious and appropriate, demonstrating exactly the kind of professionalism and social awareness that made Eleanor valuable as a caregiver for wealthy families. But Richard Westbrook, who had been observing the interaction from across the room, found himself irritated by what he perceived as a violation of the unspoken rules that governed such occasions. Westbrook had specifically instructed his household staff to remain invisible during the gala, understanding that the presence of domestic workers might remind his guests of the class distinctions that polite society preferred to ignore during charitable events. The fact that Elena was not only visible, but appeared to be charming his guests with her obvious intelligence and warmth struck him as inappropriate and potentially disruptive to the evening's carefully orchestrated social dynamics. As Isabella was led back upstairs to prepare for bed, with Elena accompanying her to ensure a smooth transition, Westbrook continued to feel annoyed by what he saw as a breach of protocol. The wine he had consumed during the cocktail hour, combined with the stress of hosting such an elaborate event, had lowered his usual inhibitions and made him more likely to act on his impulses rather than his better judgment. It was nearly an hour later, as the formal dinner program was concluding and guests were beginning to mingle more freely, that Westbrook noticed Elena standing quietly near the service entrance, obviously waiting to escort Isabella back to her room after the child's scheduled goodnight appearance. The sight of Elena observing the festivities with obvious interest and perhaps even a hint of longing triggered something in Westbrook that he would later struggle to understand or explain. Perhaps it was the reminder that his daughter seemed to have a closer relationship with the nanny than with him. Perhaps it was the uncomfortable recognition that Elena possessed a natural grace and dignity that made her seem almost like a guest rather than an employee. Or perhaps it was simply the toxic combination of alcohol, stress, and social pressure that caused him to abandon his usual restraint and express his irritation in the most public and destructive way possible. Whatever the cause, Westbrook found himself walking across the ballroom with the determined stride of someone who had decided to assert his authority without considering the consequences of his actions. His expression carried the barely controlled irritation of a man who had grown accustomed to having his wishes respected without question or delay. "Elena," he said when he reached her position, his voice pitched low enough to avoid immediate attention from nearby guests, but carrying enough edge to convey his displeasure. "What are you doing here? I specifically instructed all household staff to remain out of sight during the party." Elena looked up at her employer with the calm dignity that had always characterized her interactions with difficult situations. "I apologize, Mr. Westbrook. Isabella asked me to wait nearby in case she needed anything during her goodnight appearance. I'll return to my quarters immediately if you prefer." The explanation was reasonable and demonstrated exactly the kind of dedicated care that made Elena valuable as a nanny. But Westbrook, influenced by the wine he'd consumed and the need to maintain his authoritative image in front of his guests, was not in a mood to appreciate the nuances of childhood emotional needs or the complexities of providing quality care for a grieving child. "That's what the communication system is for," he said dismissively. Isabella is 8 years old enough to handle a brief social interaction without requiring constant supervision. I don't pay you to hover over her like she's a helpless infant. Elena's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her professional composure despite the unfairness of the criticism. Of course, sir. I understand your concerns about appropriate boundaries. But as Elena turned to leave, Westbrook continued speaking, his voice growing louder as the alcohol and the attention of nearby guests seemed to embolden his sense of superiority and his need to demonstrate his control over the situation. "You know, Elena," he said, his words now clearly audible to several nearby conversations, "this is exactly the kind of behavior that demonstrates why domestic workers need clear boundaries and firm supervision. Give them an inch, and they start thinking they belong in places where they clearly don't fit." The comment was loud enough to be overheard by a growing circle of guests who turned their attention toward the unfolding interaction with the kind of morbid fascination that wealthy people often displayed when witnessing the humiliation of those they considered beneath their social status. Elena's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she continued to maintain her dignified silence, unwilling to engage in a public confrontation that would only make the situation worse. Margaret Thornton, who had been chatting with a group of pharmaceutical executives about regulatory policy, paused her conversation to observe the drama unfolding near the service entrance. "Oh my," she murmured to her companions. "It looks like Richard is having to discipline his staff. How awkward for everyone involved." The comment was delivered with the kind of casual cruelty that reflected years of treating domestic workers as invisible and interchangeable, rather than as human beings with feelings, dignity, and complex inner lives. Several other guests began to drift toward the confrontation, drawn by the spectacle of watching someone from a lower social class being put in their place by their social superior. Victoria Ashford, the opera singer, found herself reluctantly observing the scene from her position near the bar. As someone who had risen from humble origins to achieve international fame and recognition, she was deeply uncomfortable with the class-based humiliation she was witnessing. But as a guest at the party, she felt constrained from intervening in what appeared to be a private matter between an employer and his employee. Westbrook, emboldened by his audience and apparently enjoying the opportunity to demonstrate his authority and social dominance, pressed his advantage with growing confidence and cruelty. "I mean, look at this situation," he continued, his voice now carrying clearly throughout much of the ballroom. "Here we have a charity gala raising money for children's health care, attended by some of the most influential people in New York. And my nanny thinks she can just wander around observing the festivities like she's a guest rather than hired help." The deliberate emphasis on the words hired help was designed to establish and reinforce the social hierarchy that Westbrook felt was being threatened by Elena's presence and obvious intelligence. Several guests nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable but remained silent rather than risk challenging their host's behavior. Senator Hamilton, who had built her political career on championing working-class issues, felt a stab of hypocrisy as she watched the scene unfold without intervention. Dr. Morrison, whose medical practice had taught him to value all people regardless of their economic status, found himself questioning the social circles he moved in and the casual cruelty they often displayed toward those who served them. But it was Margaret Thornton who provided the most explicit encouragement for Westbrook's behavior, her laughter tinkling like wind chimes as she offered her support for his public humiliation of Elena. "Richard, you're absolutely right," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who employed dozens of domestic workers herself. "It's so difficult to find help that understands proper boundaries these days. They watch too much television and start getting ideas above their station." The cruel observation seemed to give Westbrook permission to escalate his public destruction of Elena's dignity. "Exactly, Margaret," he said, his confidence growing with each word of support from his social peers. It's a perfect example of why we need to maintain clear distinctions between employers and employees, between those who create value and those who simply perform services. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she absorbed the full impact of Westbrook's words, but whether from anger, humiliation, or both was impossible to determine. She had endured discrimination and condescension throughout her life, but never had she been subjected to such deliberate cruelty in front of an audience that seemed to take pleasure in her discomfort and degradation. Elena here probably thinks that because she takes care of my daughter, she's somehow part of the family rather than a service provider, Westbrook continued, his voice taking on the lecturing tone of someone who believed he was offering important insights about social order and proper relationships. But that kind of thinking is dangerous for everyone involved. It blurs the lines that make civilized society possible. The comments revealed not just Westbrook's personal arrogance, but also the broader assumptions about class and worth that permeated the social circles he moved in. The idea that domestic work was inherently less valuable than financial management, that caring for children was somehow less important than managing investment portfolios, reflected a worldview that measured human worth primarily in terms of wealth accumulation and social status. Dr. Morrison, whose work with sick children had taught him to value compassion and dedication above all other qualities, found himself increasingly disgusted by what he was witnessing. "Richard," he said quietly, moving closer to the confrontation, "perhaps this conversation would be more appropriate in a private setting." But Westbrook was too intoxicated by his own sense of power and the attention of his audience to heed the gentle warning. "No, James," he replied, his voice growing even louder as he sensed the opportunity to deliver a more comprehensive lesson about social hierarchy and proper behavior. "I think this is exactly the right setting for this conversation. Everyone here understands the importance of maintaining proper social order and respecting the boundaries that make our way of life possible." He gestured dramatically toward Eleanor, who stood with her head held high despite the obvious humiliation she was enduring. Elena represents a perfect example of someone who needs to understand her place in the world. She's useful in her limited capacity, certainly, but she shouldn't mistake usefulness for equality or belonging. The cruelty of the statement seemed to hang in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning the elegant atmosphere of the charity gala and revealing an ugly truth about the attitudes that lurked beneath the polished surface of philanthropic society. Several guests looked genuinely uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, while others seemed energized by the drama and the opportunity to affirm their own social superiority through the degradation of someone they considered beneath them. Elena's response to this final, devastating insult was not what anyone expected. Instead of fleeing in tears or attempting to defend herself with words that would inevitably sound weak and desperate, she stepped forward with a grace and confidence that seemed to transform the entire dynamic of the confrontation. "Mr. Westbrook," she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength that immediately commanded attention from everyone within hearing distance. "You're absolutely right that everyone has their place in the world. But I think you might be surprised to discover what my place actually is." The unexpected response seemed to catch Westbrook completely off guard, and he hesitated for a moment before reasserting his authority with the kind of bluster that often masked uncertainty and fear. "Elena, I think you've embarrassed yourself enough for one evening. Please return to your quarters immediately, and we'll discuss your continued employment tomorrow morning." But Elena didn't move. Instead, she looked around the ballroom at the faces of people who had been watching her humiliation with varying degrees of comfort, discomfort, and cruel entertainment. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different quality, not the deferential tone of a domestic worker trying to avoid further conflict, but the confident presence of someone who had found her moment of truth and was prepared to share it with the world. "Before I go," Elena said, her words carrying clearly throughout the now silent ballroom, "I'd like to share something with all of you. You see, Mr. Westbrook is correct that everyone has their place and their purpose in this world, but sometimes our circumstances don't reflect our full capabilities, our complete identity, or our true calling. She paused, looking directly at Westbrook, with an expression that combined sadness, disappointment, and a quiet dignity that was somehow more powerful than anger would have been. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, as if everyone present sensed that they were about to witness something extraordinary and unprecedented. "I am indeed a nanny, and I'm proud of the work I do caring for Isabella," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. "I love that little girl with all my heart, and I consider it an honor to be part of her life during some of her most important developmental years. But that's not all I am, and it's certainly not all I'm capable of being." Without any further explanation, Elena walked to the center of the ballroom, positioning herself near the grand piano where the earlier musical performances had taken place. The guests watched in fascination and confusion, uncertain what they were about to witness, but sensing that something extraordinary was about to occur. Victoria Ashford, who had been observing the confrontation with growing discomfort and professional interest, found herself moving closer to get a better view of what was unfolding. As one of the world's leading opera singers, she possessed an expert ear for vocal talent and was curious about what Elena might be planning to demonstrate. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath and centering herself in a way that suggested years of training and performance experience. When she opened her eyes again, she looked out at the assembled crowd with the confident presence of a seasoned performer who owned the stage completely and was about to share something precious and transformative. And then she began to sing. The first notes of Ave Maria emerged from Elena's throat with a purity and power that seemed to transform the very air in the ballroom. Her voice soared through Schubert's sublime melody with an effortless beauty that immediately silenced every conversation and captured the complete attention of everyone present. The technical perfection of Elena's performance was immediately apparent to anyone with musical training. Her breath control was flawless, her pitch absolutely perfect, and her tone possessed a clarity and warmth that spoke of years of professional-level instruction and natural gifts of extraordinary rarity. But it was the emotional depth and spiritual intensity of Elena's singing that truly mesmerized the audience. Each phrase was shaped with exquisite sensitivity, each note placed with precision and warmth that spoke directly to the hearts of her listeners. The Latin text of the prayer was delivered with perfect diction and deep understanding of its sacred meaning. Victoria Ashford stood transfixed, her expert ear recognizing immediately that she was hearing a voice of international caliber, the kind of instrument that could grace the stages of La Scala, the Metropolitan Opera, or Covent Garden. The technical skill was matched by an interpretive maturity that suggested not just training, but genuine artistry of the highest level. Margaret Thornton, who had laughed at Elena's humiliation just moments before, found tears streaming down her cheeks as the soaring soprano voice touched something deep in her soul that had been dormant for years. The beauty of the music seemed to strip away her defenses and pretenses, revealing a capacity for emotion and genuine human connection that her privileged lifestyle had almost buried completely. Senator Hamilton felt her political instincts overwhelmed by the pure aesthetic experience of Elena's performance. As someone who had spent years crafting speeches and managing public appearances, she recognized the rare gift of being able to move people through authentic expression rather than calculated manipulation. Dr. Morrison, whose medical training had taught him to value precision and excellence, was awestruck by the combination of technical perfection and emotional authenticity that Elena was demonstrating. He understood that he was witnessing something that transcended social boundaries and class distinctions, the expression of pure human talent and artistic truth. As Elena's voice filled the mansion's ballroom, The artificial social barriers that had defined the evening's interactions seemed to dissolve completely. The wealthy socialites, the business titans, the political figures, the cultural elite, all found themselves transported by music that reminded them of beauty and truth that existed far beyond the material world they typically inhabited. The children's charity that had brought them together suddenly seemed less like a social obligation and more like a genuine expression of human compassion. The fundraising goals that had seemed so important earlier in the evening now appeared trivial compared to the reminder of what truly mattered in life: love, beauty, connection, and the capacity to touch other human beings through authentic expression of our highest selves. Charles Blackstone, a notoriously difficult investment banker known for his ruthless negotiating tactics and emotional coldness, stood with his champagne glass forgotten in his hand, his usual cynicism overwhelmed by the pure beauty of what he was hearing. For the first time in years, he found himself thinking about the poetry he had written in college, the dreams of artistic expression that he had abandoned in pursuit of financial success. Elena moved through the final phrases of Ave Maria, her voice rising to the ethereal high notes that seemed to touch the mansion's ornate ceiling. The entire ballroom had become a sacred space where artificial distinctions between people had been replaced by a shared experience of transcendent beauty. When the last note faded into silence, the ballroom remained quiet for several long moments, as if the audience was afraid that any sound might break the spell that Elena's voice had woven around them. The silence was not empty, but full, pregnant with emotion, recognition, and the kind of awe that people experience when they encounter something truly extraordinary. Then, slowly, one person began to applaud. It was Victoria Ashford, whose trained ear and artistic sensibility had allowed her to fully appreciate the magnitude of what she had just witnessed. Her applause was soon joined by another, then another, and within seconds the entire room erupted in thunderous applause that seemed to shake the crystal chandeliers above. The ovation continued for several minutes, with guests rising to their feet in acknowledgement of a performance that had transcended the categories of amateur and professional, servant and guest, hired help and artist. Elena had revealed herself to be something that none of them had anticipated, a true artist whose talent demanded recognition and respect, regardless of her current circumstances. Richard Westbrook stood frozen in shock, his face pale as he processed what had just occurred. The woman he had publicly humiliated as a mere domestic worker had just delivered a performance that would have been worthy of the world's greatest concert halls. The guests he had been trying to impress were now giving Elena a standing ovation that lasted far longer than any applause he had ever received for his business achievements or philanthropic contributions. Victoria Ashford was among the first to approach Elena after the applause finally subsided, her face glowing with the kind of excitement that only came from discovering extraordinary talent in unexpected places. "My dear," she said, her voice filled with awe and professional respect, "that was absolutely magnificent. Where did you study? How long have you been performing? Why aren't you on the stages of the world's great opera houses?" Elena's response was gracious, but tinged with the melancholy of dreams deferred and opportunities sacrificed for family obligations. "I studied music in high school and was offered scholarships to several conservatories," she said quietly. "But life took me in a different direction, and I've kept my singing mostly private for many years." Dr. Morrison, still visibly moved by the performance, joined the growing circle of admirers surrounding Elena. "Young lady," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades evaluating human potential, "that was one of the most beautiful performances I've ever heard, and I've attended concerts at Lincoln Center and Carnegie Hall for over 30 years. You have a gift that the world deserves to hear." The questions and compliments continued to pour in from guests who wanted to understand how someone with such extraordinary talent had ended up working as a domestic employee. Elena found herself explaining her background, her family's sacrifices, and the practical decisions that had led her away from music and toward childcare as a more stable career path. Charles Blackstone, his usual business demeanor replaced by genuine emotion and enthusiasm, stepped forward with an offer that surprised everyone, including himself. "Elena," he said, "I want to help you pursue your musical career in whatever way I can. Whether that means connecting you with the right people, providing financial support for additional training, or simply ensuring that you have the opportunity to share your gift with larger audiences, I want to be part of making that happen." Margaret Thornton, transformed by Eleanor's performance from a sneering socialite into a genuinely contrite human being, approached with tears still visible on her cheeks. "Eleanor," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "I owe you a profound apology for my earlier behavior. I had no idea. What you just shared with us was absolutely magnificent. Please forgive my ignorance and cruelty." The apology was echoed by several other guests who had participated in or enjoyed Elena's earlier humiliation. The power of her performance had not only showcased her extraordinary talent, but had also forced them to confront their own prejudices and assumptions about people they had considered beneath their social status. Senator Hamilton, whose political career had been built on understanding and connecting with diverse constituencies, found herself re-evaluating her own attitudes toward domestic workers and service employees. "Eleanor," she said, "what you've shared tonight has reminded all of us that talent and worth aren't determined by job titles or social position. You've given us a gift that goes far beyond your beautiful music." As the crowd of admirers continued to grow around Elena, Richard Westbrook remained isolated and increasingly uncomfortable. The man who had begun the evening as the undisputed center of social authority was now watching his nanny receive the kind of admiration and respect that he had spent years trying to earn through wealth and business success. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Elena's authenticity, talent and dignity had won over his guests in a way that his money and social position never could. The humiliation he had attempted to inflict on her had rebounded onto him, revealing character flaws that his wealth and social status couldn't disguise or excuse. Dr. Morrison, who served on the boards of several arts organizations, was already formulating plans to help Elena pursue professional opportunities in music. "Elena," he said, "I'd like to introduce you to some people who could help you explore opportunities in professional music. There are scholarships and programs specifically designed for talented adults who want to pursue artistic careers later in life." Victoria Ashford nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely," she agreed. "With a voice like yours, there are numerous opportunities in opera, concert performance, and even music education that could provide both artistic fulfillment and financial stability. I'd be honored to make some introductions and provide recommendations." The conversation was interrupted by a small voice from the mansion's main staircase. Elena," called Isabella Westbrook, who had awakened from her sleep and come downstairs in her pajamas to investigate the unusual sounds coming from the ballroom. Isabella ran across the marble floor and threw her arms around Elena with the unconscious affection of a child who had found her source of comfort and security in a confusing adult world. "I heard you singing," she exclaimed, her voice filled with excitement and pride. "You were singing the beautiful songs like you do for me, but for all these people." The sight of the 8-year-old girl embracing her nanny with such obvious love and trust provided a powerful counterpoint to the evening's earlier cruelty. Everyone in the ballroom could see the genuine bond between Elena and Isabella, a relationship built on care, respect, and mutual affection that transcended the employer-employee dynamic that Westbrook had tried to enforce so brutally. "Did you like the music, Mija?" Elena asked, kneeling down to Isabella's eye level and speaking with the gentle warmth that characterized all her interactions with the child. "It was the most beautiful thing I ever heard," Isabella replied with the honest enthusiasm that only children possess. "All these people were crying because your voice is so pretty." "Daddy, wasn't Elena the most amazing singer you ever heard?" Isabella's innocent question forced Westbrook into a moment of public reckoning that he was completely unprepared to handle. His daughter's obvious pride in Elena's performance, combined with the clear admiration of his guests, had created a situation where his earlier behavior appeared not just cruel, but profoundly misguided and personally revealing. "Yes, Isabella," Westbrook said quietly, his voice lacking its earlier confidence and authority. "Elena was very extraordinary." But Isabella's 8-year-old perception cut through her father's diplomatic response with devastating clarity and moral precision. "Daddy, why did you say those mean things to Elena before? She takes care of me every day, and she's the nicest, most wonderful person in the whole world. And now everyone knows she's the most beautiful singer too." The child's innocent question hung in the air like an indictment, forcing everyone present to confront the contrast between Westbrook's treatment of Elena and the reality of her character, abilities, and worth as a human being. The silence that followed was heavy with judgment and embarrassment, as the assembled guests processed the full implications of what they had witnessed. Victoria Ashford, whose decades in the performing arts had given her insight into human character and the courage that authentic expression required, stepped forward to address the uncomfortable silence. "Elena," she said, "would you be willing to sing something else for us? Perhaps something that showcases a different aspect of your remarkable voice?" Elena looked around the ballroom, meeting the eyes of people who had gone from viewing her as an invisible servant to recognizing her as a remarkable artist whose talent demanded respect and recognition. The transformation was as profound as it was unexpected, and she understood that this moment represented a crossroads, not just in her own life, but in the lives of everyone present. "I'd be honored," Elena replied. And this time she chose a piece that allowed her to demonstrate the full range and versatility of her gift, while also paying tribute to her cultural heritage and the sacrifices her parents had made for her education. She began with Llorona, a traditional Mexican folk song that her grandmother had sung to her as a child, and that she had later learned to perform with operatic technique and emotional depth. The song told the story of a woman lamenting lost love, but in Elena's interpretation, it became a meditation on loss, hope, and the resilience of the human spirit. The performance was even more stunning than her first, as Elena's confidence grew and she began to truly inhabit the role of artist rather than reluctant participant. Her voice soared through the challenging passages with effortless grace, while her interpretation of the Spanish text revealed not just linguistic fluency, but deep cultural understanding and emotional authenticity. The combination of operatic technique with traditional Mexican musical forms created something entirely unique and powerful, a performance that honored both her classical training and her cultural roots, while demonstrating the kind of artistic versatility that marked truly exceptional performers. When she finished, the applause was even more enthusiastic than before, and several guests were openly weeping at the beauty and emotional power of what they had experienced. Victoria Ashford was visibly moved, recognizing that she had witnessed not just technical excellence, but the kind of artistic authenticity that couldn't be taught or manufactured. "Elena," Ashford said, her voice filled with professional admiration and personal emotion, "you have just demonstrated something that many professional singers spend their entire careers trying to achieve: the ability to combine technical perfection with authentic emotional expression and cultural authenticity. You are a true artist, and the world needs to hear your voice." Charles Blackstone, who had spent his entire adult life focused on financial gain and business success, found himself thinking about meaning and purpose in ways that he hadn't since his college years. "Elena," he said, "I want to create a foundation that provides financial support for talented individuals like yourself who want to pursue artistic careers. Your performance tonight has reminded me that there are forms of wealth and success that have nothing to do with money and everything to do with the human capacity for beauty and truth." The offer was immediately seconded by Dr. Morrison and several other guests who recognized that they had witnessed something extraordinary and wanted to play a role in ensuring that Elena's gift reached its full potential, and that other talented individuals facing similar circumstances might have opportunities that had been denied to her. Margaret Thornton, still deeply affected by her own earlier behavior and the profound impact of Elena's performance, made a particularly meaningful gesture. "Elena," she said, "my family foundation provides grants for arts education and performance opportunities. I would be honored to fund whatever training, coaching, or performance opportunities you need to pursue your musical career at the highest level." Dr. Morrison added his own commitment to the growing list of offers and opportunities. "The Children's Hospital has been looking for ways to incorporate music therapy into our treatment programs. Someone with your combination of musical talent and experience working with children could help us develop programs that use music to help young patients heal emotionally as well as physically." The evening had taken on a dreamlike quality for Elena, as opportunities that she had thought were forever closed began opening before her eyes like flowers blooming in fast-forward motion. The people who had witnessed her humiliation were now competing to offer support and assistance, transformed by her music from indifferent observers into passionate advocates for her success and artistic development. Isabella, who had been listening to the adult conversations with the intense focus that children bring to discussions that might affect their world, tugged on Elena's dress and looked up at her with the innocent wisdom that children sometimes possess. "Elena," she said, her voice carrying the kind of pure honesty that adults often lost, "now everyone knows what I always knew, that you're the most special person in the whole world, and that your voice can make people feel better when they're sad, just like it does for me." The child's words seemed to crystallize the evening's transformation, highlighting the contrast between genuine worth and superficial social status. Elena's value had never changed. She had always been a talented, caring, and remarkable person. What had changed was other people's ability to recognize and appreciate those qualities beyond the limitations of her current employment circumstances. As the evening continued and the formal gala program concluded, Elena found herself at the center of conversations about music, art, opportunity, and the barriers that prevented talented people from pursuing their dreams. Several guests shared their own stories of roads not taken and opportunities missed due to practical considerations or social expectations. Victoria Ashford, whose own rise from poverty to international acclaim had required overcoming numerous obstacles, was particularly interested in Elena's background and her journey from promising music student to professional nanny. "You know," she said, "your story is not uncommon in the arts world. Many of the most successful performers I know had to take detours and make sacrifices before they could fully pursue their artistic calling. The difference is that some people get second chances and others don't. But tonight, you've created your own second chance." Dr. Morrison, who had spent his career advocating for children's welfare and understanding the importance of nurturing environments, was struck by Elena's combination of artistic talent and natural ability to work with children. "You know," he said, "your experience combining childcare with musical talent could be incredibly valuable in therapeutic settings. There are programs that use music to help children deal with trauma, illness, and emotional difficulties. Your skills in both areas could make you uniquely qualified for that kind of work." The suggestion opened up possibilities that Elena had never considered, ways to combine her love of music with her dedication to helping children, creating a career path that would honor both her artistic gifts and her nurturing instincts, while providing the kind of financial stability that would allow her to support her family and pursue her dreams simultaneously. Senator Hamilton, whose political career had been built on understanding the challenges facing working families, was particularly interested in Elena's story as an example of how talent and potential could be constrained by economic circumstances. "Elena," she said, "your story illustrates so many of the issues I've been working on: access to education, support for the arts, and the barriers that prevent talented people from achieving their full potential. Would you be willing to work with my office on some initiatives that could help other people in similar situations?" The conversation revealed layers of opportunity and connection that Elena had never imagined possible. What had begun as the worst evening of her professional life was transforming into a network of support and opportunity that could change not only her own future, but potentially the futures of countless other talented individuals facing similar barriers. Meanwhile, Richard Westbrook watched these conversations with growing discomfort and dawning awareness of the magnitude of his error. The woman he had dismissed as mere hired help was now being courted by some of the most influential people in New York, all eager to support her artistic career and benefit from her remarkable talents and insights. The isolation he felt was not just social, but moral. His behavior had revealed character flaws that his wealth and social position couldn't disguise, and many of his guests were now viewing him with barely concealed disapproval and disappointment. The man who had hosted the evening to enhance his reputation and social standing had instead damaged both through his own cruelty and prejudice. It was Isabella who ultimately forced her father to confront the consequences of his actions. As Elena prepared to say goodnight and the guests began to make their departures, Isabella grabbed her father's hand and Elena's hand, bringing them together in a gesture of innocent reconciliation that was impossible to ignore or deflect. "Daddy," Isabella said with the moral clarity that only children possess, "you need to apologize to Elena for being mean to her. She's the best person I know, and you hurt her feelings in front of all these people. That wasn't nice, and Mommy would have been sad if she saw you being mean to someone who takes such good care of me." The invocation of her late mother's memory and moral standards cut through all the social complexities and adult rationalizations, reducing the situation to its essential moral components. Catherine Westbrook had been known for her kindness, compassion, and genuine concern for others regardless of their social position. The idea that she would have been disappointed in her husband's behavior added an additional layer of shame and regret to an already devastating evening. Westbrook looked at Elena, seeing her, perhaps for the first time, as a complete human being rather than a service provider whose only value was her utility to his family. The dignity with which she had handled his earlier cruelty, the extraordinary talent she had revealed, and the obvious love his daughter felt for her, all combined to create a picture of someone deserving of respect and appreciation rather than dismissal and humiliation. "Elena," he said quietly, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance and carrying the weight of genuine remorse, "I owe you an apology that goes far beyond what I can adequately express in words. My behavior this evening was inexcusable, and it revealed character flaws that I'm deeply ashamed of." He paused, struggling to find words that could convey the depth of his regret without sounding self-serving or insincere. "You've given my daughter love, care, and stability during some of the most difficult years of her life. You've brought music and joy into our home in ways that I was too blind and self-absorbed to recognize. And tonight, you've shared a gift that has moved everyone here in ways that I'm still trying to understand." Elena listened to his apology with the same grace she had shown throughout the evening, neither accepting it immediately nor rejecting it outright. Her response, when it came, demonstrated the kind of emotional maturity and wisdom that couldn't be bought with money or inherited through social position. "Mr. Westbrook," she said finally, "I appreciate your words and your recognition of what happened tonight. I hope that this evening has helped all of us see each other more clearly and with greater compassion. Isabella is a wonderful child who deserves to see the adults in her life treating each other with kindness and respect." The response was generous without being weak, dignified without being sanctimonious. It demonstrated Elena's fundamental decency, while also making clear that forgiveness would require more than words. It would require genuine change in attitudes and behavior. Victoria Ashford, who had been observing this exchange with the insight that came from decades of experience with human nature and artistic expression, stepped forward with a proposal that would reshape everyone's future in ways they couldn't yet imagine. "Elena," she said, "I've been thinking about everything we've discussed tonight, and I'd like to offer you something that might seem unusual, but could be perfect for your unique situation and talents." She explained that she was in the process of establishing a new program at Lincoln Center that would combine performance opportunities with educational outreach and therapeutic applications of music. The program needed someone who could serve as both a performer and an educator, someone who understood the healing power of music and had experience working with children and families facing difficult circumstances. The position would provide a full salary, benefits, and support for you to complete advanced training in both performance and music therapy, Ashford continued. More importantly, it would allow you to use both your musical gifts and your nurturing instincts to help people in ways that could genuinely transform their lives. Dr. Morrison immediately added his support to the proposal. The Children's Hospital would be eager to partner with Lincoln Center on such a program. We could provide clinical settings where music therapy could be integrated with traditional medical treatment, and Elena's background working with children would be invaluable in developing effective therapeutic protocols. The offers and opportunities continued to multiply as the evening's guests recognized the rare combination of talent, experience, and character that Elena represented. What had begun as a single job offer was evolving into a comprehensive career opportunity that would allow Elena to pursue her artistic dreams while continuing to work with children and families. Senator Hamilton offered to provide legislative support for arts education programs that could be modeled on Elena's experience and background. Charles Blackstone committed to funding scholarship programs for talented individuals facing financial barriers to artistic education. Margaret Thornton pledged ongoing support for both Elena's career development and broader initiatives to identify and nurture artistic talent in underserved communities. As Elena considered these life-changing opportunities, she looked down at Isabella, who had been listening to the adult conversations with the intense focus that children bring to discussions that might affect their world in significant ways. "What about Isabella?" Eleanor asked, her voice carrying genuine concern for the child who had become such an important part of her life. "I can't abandon her, especially not after everything that's happened tonight and everything she's been through with losing her mother." It was Westbrook who provided the answer, demonstrating perhaps the first truly selfless decision he had made all evening. The recognition of his own failures as a father, combined with his newfound appreciation for Elena's importance in his daughter's life, had created a moment of moral clarity that cut through his usual focus on control and social position. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying a humility that was entirely new for him, "if you're willing to accept these incredible opportunities, I'd like to arrange for you to continue being part of Isabella's life, in whatever way works best for everyone involved. She needs you, and I'm beginning to understand that I need to learn from your example about what it means to truly care for another person." The arrangement that emerged from the evening's events was unprecedented but perfect for everyone involved. Elena would begin her new career with the Lincoln Center program while maintaining a relationship with Isabella that would provide stability for the child while allowing Elena to pursue her dreams without abandoning her commitments to the people she loved. Perhaps most importantly, the evening had transformed the relationships among everyone involved in ways that would continue to develop long after the last guest had departed. Elena had discovered that her talents were valued and that opportunities for growth and recognition were still possible, even when they had seemed to be forever foreclosed by practical circumstances and economic realities. Isabella had seen her beloved Elena receive the respect and admiration she deserved, reinforcing the child's developing sense of justice and her belief in the importance of treating all people with dignity and kindness. The experience would shape her understanding of social relationships and moral responsibility for the rest of her life. Westbrook faced the most difficult transformation of all, recognizing that his wealth and social position had blinded him to the worth and dignity of people he had considered beneath his status. The lesson was painful but necessary, forcing him to examine assumptions and attitudes that had shaped his interactions with others for decades. 6 months later, Elena gave her first professional concert at Lincoln Center, performing as part of the inaugural program for the new therapeutic music initiative that had grown out of the connections and opportunities created during that transformational evening at the Westbrook mansion. The audience included many of the same people who had witnessed her impromptu performance at the charity gala, but the context was entirely different. Now she stood on one of the world's most prestigious stages as a recognized artist and educator, introducing songs and programs that had been inspired by her work with young patients and her journey from nanny to professional musician. The concert combined classical repertoire with pieces that demonstrated the therapeutic applications of music in healing and personal development. Isabella sat in the front row, beaming with pride, as the woman who had changed her life shared her extraordinary gift with a much larger audience. Beside her sat Richard Westbrook, a man who had been transformed by the recognition that true worth comes not from wealth or status, but from character, talent, and the capacity to touch other people's lives with beauty, compassion, and authenticity. Victoria Ashford, who had become Elena's mentor and advocate, introduced the evening's program with remarks about the power of music to transcend social boundaries and reveal the extraordinary talents that exist throughout society, waiting only for recognition and opportunity to flourish. "Tonight," Ashford told the audience, "we are celebrating not just the remarkable talents of Elena Vasquez, but also the reminder that gifts and genius can be found anywhere, in any circumstances, among any people. Our responsibility as a society is to create opportunities for those gifts to be recognized and nurtured, regardless of the social or economic circumstances in which they may be hidden." As Elena's voice soared through the concert hall, filling the space with music that spoke of triumph over adversity and the power of dreams sustained through years of patient waiting, everyone present understood that they were witnessing more than just an exceptional performance. They were witnessing the fulfillment of human potential, the triumph of dignity over humiliation, and the transformation that becomes possible when people are seen and valued for who they truly are, rather than what their circumstances might suggest. The millionaire who had humiliated the nanny had learned that true wealth comes not from the ability to diminish others, but from the capacity to recognize and celebrate the extraordinary gifts that exist in every human being, waiting only for the right moment, the right audience, and the right opportunity to be revealed in all their magnificent and transformative beauty. 1 year later, Elena's program at Lincoln Center had become a model for similar initiatives across the country, demonstrating how the arts could be used to heal, educate, and transform lives in ways that traditional approaches couldn't achieve. Her story had inspired legislation, supporting arts education for underserved communities, funding for music therapy programs, and scholarship opportunities for talented individuals facing economic barriers to artistic careers. Isabella, now 9 years old and thriving under the continued care and influence of Elena's presence in her life, had begun taking voice lessons herself, displaying early signs of inheriting both her nanny's musical gifts and her father's intellectual curiosity. The relationship between Elena and the Westbrook family had evolved into something resembling an extended family structure, with boundaries that reflected mutual respect rather than employer-employee dynamics. Richard Westbrook had undergone his own transformation, using his wealth and influence to support the arts education initiatives that had grown out of that fateful evening. His foundation now provided millions in funding for programs that identified and nurtured artistic talent regardless of social or economic background, ensuring that other talented individuals wouldn't face the barriers that had almost prevented Elena from sharing her gifts with the world. The charity gala that had begun as a typical social event for wealthy philanthropists had become an annual celebration of the transformative power of music, art, and human dignity. Each year, the event featured performances by artists who had been discovered in unlikely circumstances or who had overcome significant obstacles to pursue their calling. But perhaps the most lasting impact of that evening was the reminder it provided to everyone who witnessed it that extraordinary gifts exist everywhere, in every community and every social class, waiting only for recognition, opportunity, and the kind of support that allows human potential to flourish. Elena's voice had not just filled a ballroom with beautiful music, it had opened hearts, changed minds, and demonstrated that the most powerful transformations often come not from wealth or position, but from the courage to reveal one's authentic self and the wisdom to recognize and celebrate the gifts that exist in others. The nanny, who had been humiliated for not knowing her place, had shown everyone present what their place truly was, not in some rigid social hierarchy, but in a shared human community where everyone's gifts matter and everyone's dignity deserves protection and respect.